On this edition of Main Street, we'll find out that home is where the heart is. For historians, it's South Union, and for those who built a city on a smaller scale, as well as for train enthusiasts big and small. We are on our way with Main Street, going home.
Funding for Main Street was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you who support quality programs such as Main Street that appear only on public television.
Hello and welcome to Main Street. I'm Barbara Deeb. You know, our homes say something unique about us, and the places that we're going to visit today take that idea one step further. We're here at Shaker Village in South Union as we explore a little more about this community located in South Central Kentucky. The Shakers established this settlement in 1807 and flourished here until it was sold at auction in 1922. The rise and decline of the Shakers is a tale of the challenges of faith and progress, and their home gives testament to both. The Great American Dollhouse Museum in Danville is a fascinating mix of miniatures and storytelling where an entire community is created on a small scale but has a big impact on visitors, young and old. Trains have captivated us since their invention in the early 1800s, and the Kentucky Railway Museum in New Haven is home to a collection of vintage trains, large and small. We'll take you on a ride back in time that you won't soon forget and show you a world where toy trains bring back the good old days. We're going home on this edition of Main Street.
The Shakers were really already well established in New England when they found out about the great revivals here in Kentucky. The Shakers came to Kentucky, and during those revivals started letting people know what they were all about, and people initially were off-put by it. Their theology, their way of living was so different than what most people were used to that they didn't like it. And it's always been odd to me that they were able to get so many converts to it, because it was all about communal living, number one, and not everybody wanted to live that way. The celibacy aspect of it was probably the most controversial thing of all. Amazingly, entire families joined the Shakers during that period and were willing to separate in order to have a more godly purpose for their life. Initially, that was why people were willing to convert, because they were very willing to dedicate their entire life to God. It was a sacrificial thing. Later on, as the Shakers progressed, their living environment, their creature comforts were so much greater than other people. It brought even more and more people to places like South Union and Pleasant Hill. People came just because it was a great place to live. The Shakers believed in the onset of equality of the sexes. In fact, the founder of Shakerism was Ann Lee, a woman, and she established leadership in male and female, an eldress and an elder who would oversee the most important part of their life, which was the spiritual aspect, the spiritual growth. But then each one of the dwelling houses, the communal dwelling houses, had an elder and an eldress too, to take care of the temporal matters, the things that people needed. The dwelling houses were symmetrical, divided down the middle, one side for men and one side for women. There are two staircases which kept the sexes apart. There is no real division, there's no wall between the sexes, only an imaginary line down the middle of those buildings. So there was a trust aspect, an accountability aspect. The Shakers knew early on that they were going to have to make money to make this enterprise work. You can't keep having people come in day after day and feeding them 3 hot meals a day without giving them something to do and producing income as well. So they established industries just from the very beginning here at South Union. They started with a mill here where people could bring in their cloth and have it sized and finished. And they did that as a service for the community and got money in return. They made carpets and rugs in the community. They made silk cloth, imported silkworms, and sold bolts of cloth and thread. So they were thinking of everything that they could possibly do to make money and to keep people busy here too in industry. The Shakers believed that their work was worship, and if you can make that worship and that work more efficient, and you can get more done, and you can seek perfection a little bit better, you are willing to adopt any kind of technology that's available, and the Shakers did. They thought that anything they did on a daily basis, if they could do it more perfectly, then you were praising God or worshiping more perfectly. So, in the kitchens, they got the newest of stoves and ovens, and when one wore out, they would find another. They believed that technology also simplified their lives, and they were all about simplicity. In this village, they had running water in the dwelling houses and in many of the workshops as early as the 1830s. They had indoor plumbing here after the turn of the 20th century and the electric lights. They had a telephone system here in the village the very year that Alexander Graham Bell invented it. So, you know, technology was a really good thing for the Shakers, and they were all about that. The 1850s were a great time at South Union because economically they were doing well, the population was up. From a spiritual standpoint, wonderful things are happening here within the community as well. But the Civil War was one of the things that changed everything at South Union. Because they were located on a main highway through Kentucky, troop movement took place day after day after day. And the troops camped here, they demanded food, they took up fences for campfires. The Shakers were not able to peddle their wares for about 4.5 years. It really made an impact at South Union. The railroad was built in 1860, right prior to the war, and what they saw as a great boon, possibility of a boon to their economy, did take place after the war, but it also took away the young people. So what they saw as a great thing initially was probably one of the things that helped destroy the community. A community where you're not producing your own children and you're depending on converts. If all the young people leave, your population grows older and they're not being replaced, and that's what happened here. By the turn of the 20th century, there were only about 50 people left at South Union. They were still trying to carry on some of their industries. Many of them had closed. The community still had in its ownership about 4,000 acres of land, and they could not take care of it. Most of the work was being done here by hired laborers at that time. It just was not working the way it should. The Central Ministry in New York came down for a visit in 1921 and deemed that South Union was no longer a profitable or an effective force for Shakerism anymore, and they said that it should be closed. The village had a huge auction in September of 1922. It was the last of 2 or 3 auctions that had taken place that year, but the final auction saw the dissolution of the village. It saw the dispersion of all the furniture that was left, the farm equipment, the livestock, and the place was cut up into many, many farms. One central tract that held most of the historic buildings was part of the village proper, was bought by one gentleman. After he bought the property, he soon began to tear down buildings. He tore the church down, the meeting house, and built a vacation home near where the foundation was of the original building, and tore down huge dwelling houses and the trustee's office that had been the seat of all business here for almost a century at that time. And then took the cemetery stones up and ground them and built barns over part of the cemetery and grazed cattle over it. And so I don't really know why there was so much destruction here, other than the fact that those older purposes were long gone at that point, and he had a new purpose for the place, and definitely was not someone interested in historic preservation or the history of the Shakers at all. It's interesting that artifacts, objects continue to come back here too. Each year we accession things that maybe somebody's great-grandmother bought at the auction in 1922, or now their great-great-grandparents as time goes on. But things continue to surface, and it's all part of a big puzzle that helps us know more about what the Shakers were like, what their furniture looked like, what they wore. It's just a fascinating part of my job that I really, really enjoy.
One of the things I say to people is that whatever you think this museum is, it's different than that. And that's usually what they find.
The museum is a place where we tell stories, and I'm very attached to the whole concept of storytelling here. We tell the story of United States history, we tell the story of miniaturism and dollhouse collecting, and we tell the part of the story that's the most fun for the people who come here is that we tell the stories of the little people who live in the houses. So there are captions, and a lot of times they're funny. It's a kind of looking in on other people's lives and seeing their foibles, seeing what they're doing, how they're playing, how they're working, what's going on with them. It's fun for people to see that people were thinking and feeling a lot of things 100 years ago that are very similar to what we're thinking and feeling today, in a different circumstance, in a different time, in different costumes, with different furniture, you know, but they were people just like we are.
One of the things we wanted was that whenever you turn a corner around here, something happens. And that was as much a physical, visual matter as it was anything else.
When you come into the museum, the first thing you see in the exhibition hall is a timeline of United States history. When you leave the timeline of U.S. history, you come into the village of Copper Hollow. And the village of Copper Hollow has city streets. In fact, it's got cobblestone floors. And you choose which way to go. There's not, just like if you visited a real little village, there's not a right or wrong way. On the outskirts of town, there's a Shaker village, which is kind of fun because there's a Shaker village outside of Danville at Pleasant Hill. So you just go up and down the streets. There's a mansion district, but when you cross the tracks, there's a rooming houses district in a poorer neighborhood. There's a factory district.
What's most interesting to me is the layering of the storytelling. Lori and the other artists, my daughter included, my daughter Hannah had a great deal to do with the early exhibits in the museum. They layer in a kind of visual storytelling that goes quite deep in these houses. This is, among other things, it's a history museum, a museum of social history, and the dolls that exist in the museum are often chosen, selected, even built to have human qualities. They're not about prettiness, they're about the life, the actual life that people lived in a town of this kind.
The first thing that I think about when designing a building is who lives in it, and I'm talking about the little people. Who are the little people? They're not just random little people any more than I or anyone else is a random little person. We have personalities. We have socioeconomic backgrounds. We have preferences. Some have pets. Some like music. Some are very messy. Some are very neat. They have different relationships. Sometimes children may live with grandma and grandpa. I mean, everything is very, very specific to those people. Within businesses, there are some stores that are very upscale. There are some stores that are very casual, that are very even poor. In the rural district, there are country stores that are very dingy. So all of those details have got to be decided upon before going in. What is that place? It's not just some kind of generic dollhouse. There's no such thing here as a generic choice. It's all specific. And the numbers of things, of objects that go into each room or into each store or into each building are huge. There may be tens of thousands of things in one dollhouse. It's that number. But if you went to your house and started counting the numbers of things, the things that are stashed underneath the dresser, underneath the bed, that are piled high in certain places, you would find that we have many, 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 many objects, more than what you would think of in any given place. This is very much a family museum. I run it. My two daughters have been very involved in it, and my husband teaches at Center College, and everybody works at the museum. We do the mowing, we do the landscaping, we do the buying and selling in the store. My younger daughter works at the cash register. I mean, it's just very much a family-run business. And more than that, we all do a lot of brainstorming.
It is a joy. I've often said that this was something that was going to make our family or break it, and here we are. We're still here. So I think we're happy doing it. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. I really like my parents. I think the museum is so unusual that it's really interesting to be here and see people come and experience it for the first time. A woman came in with her daughter who was deaf. So they came in and they went through the museum, and the little girl just loved it. She was probably 8. And when they came out of the museum, they were leaving, and the girl signed something to her mother. And her mother told my mom, she says she wants to live here.
There are certain things we hear all the time, over and over again. Probably the commonest phrase is, "That's amazing. That was amazing. I can't believe it." That's something that we hear every day. As you go through the museum, there are always new surprises. You turn a corner and there's a kind of, wow, oh, something different kind of factor. And the museum is always changing.
There are still plenty of opportunities for growth and change and creative development in the museum. And again, I'm holding on to my wife, and she's leading us where she wants to take us.
I grew up with the post-war, I was in the first group of baby boomers, and trains were a staple. You know, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, they were underneath the Christmas train. You got a train for Christmas. Our generation, the baby boomers and our parents, grew up with trains. That was the primary mode of transportation before the superhighways. And at the turn of the century, 1 job in every 4 in the United States was either on the railroad or affiliated with the railroad. So for years, people have been fascinated with them, especially the steam engines, because it's almost like they're a living, breathing organism. You stand next to a steam engine and the ground vibrates and it hisses and it pops and it crackles and smoke and steam come out. And they're kind of magical things, and kids love them. So when people of the preceding generations come, they want to see those things again, and they want to give that kind of an experience to their children. That's one reason that the museum exists. We're attempting to bring back model trains for the public and for the kids. For years we had a very extensive model train set up in the model train building on the property, but it was damaged in a flood in 2010, and we're still negotiating with FEMA to hopefully get that resolved. But the kids and the families really miss seeing the trains, so we decided to convert part of the space here back into a model train display, as well as additional displays of artifacts that we had in storage, signs, oil cans, lanterns, all kinds of memorabilia that was related to both the model railroading, toy trains, and regular railroading. But what you do is you start out with some basic ideas about what do you want an area to look with, and you cover that with some scenery material, and you'll wet it down with wet water, which is water with some detergent in it. Then you'll put white glue on it to hold it in place, and when that dries, it dries clear. And then you come back and you start putting in the trees and the buildings and the people, and you bring it to life. We plan to hand out handouts to the kids when they come in, and like looking for Waldo, we'll say things like, can you find the deer walking on the hillside? Can you find the little boy talking with the horse? Can you see the 3 boys tipping over the outhouse? So there's all these little scenes that are in various places. You try to bring these things to life, animate it some, and give it more of an experience than just the typical loop of track around a Christmas tree. The happiest times for me and for most of my staff are when we have special events, when we have Thomas the Tank Engine here. It's magical at Christmas time when we have the Santa Claus Express and the North Pole Express, when we have train robberies. These things where people can get involved and it's kind of living history.
When the train leaves the station here, we go usually to Boston, Kentucky, which is about 11 miles down the track. And we get to Boston, the train stops there. The engine has to go on the side track and go to the other end to come back, so they switch there. Usually there's a shootout between the marshals and the outlaws. Kids are all hyped up. I make an announcement in each car about, if they see any riders on horseback, or to holler for the marshals. So you hear them start hollering, here's some outlaws. So we get between the cars and we shoot at the outlaws and they shoot back.
Get away from my train! Hey, you're dead!
When they do get on the train, they come through with a money bag and tell people to give them their money.
Come on, y'all, put it up, Hey, don't make me shoot this nice lady in the bag. I'll be back for you.
Oh, I'll be waiting.
Come on, folks, get the money up and some nice jewelry.
It's a fundraising project actually for the Kentucky Railway Museum, and the byproduct is a crusade for children. We've been doing it, our group, Clayton's Wild Bunch, since 2003. It's comprised of 30 some odd volunteers, and from all walks of life. And they do it because they believe in the Railway Museum and the heritage about trains in Kentucky, and for the fundraising part for the crusade, really.
The museum is continuing to grow. We are kind of a mid-range, mid-sized museum. We are a nonprofit. We don't get state support. We don't get federal support other than an occasional grant that we'll get that we have to match. We have to try to find income wherever we can find it. And we have a lot of pieces of equipment that we have to restore, but very few resources. So we're always looking for new volunteers, people who want to come and play and help us restore and maintain things. We've got the historic steam engine 152. It's currently being worked on, and we are going to bring it back to life in about another 1.5 or 2 years. And we probably have another 10 to 15 cars and pieces of equipment that could be on the National Register if we had the time and the manpower and the wherewithal to get those back into restored situations. Most of the coaches go back to the 1920s when they were built, 26, 28, 30. The engines too, they go back to the 50s and the 30s. So you're talking about old pieces of equipment that periodically breaks down. It requires a lot to keep it up and running, but we do it with volunteers. We only have 5 paid staff. Everything else that's done here is done with volunteers. The average age of one of my volunteers is in their 60s. Most of my engineers are 60 years of age and up, and they love it. So we're trying to keep those pieces of history alive for next generations and explain to them why it was so important and so critical for the development of this country. We were an inventive nation. We were a nation of immigrants. We were a nation of people who came here to work and were hard workers. They didn't mind working hard, and they created all of this. And now we have to preserve some of that history. And we do it in model trains, we do it in the big railroads, and we do it for the people who come after us so that they won't forget. Life's too short not to have some fun and not to make people enjoy themselves. And that's part of my mission, and most of my staff are in that same vein. We want people to have a good time.
Well, we've come to the end of our show, and we hope that you've enjoyed visiting the homes of some very special people and places. We took you to the Shaker Museum at South Union and introduced you to these innovative people that established a community only to have it slowly decline as progress came to this area of Kentucky. Then we explored the Great American Dollhouse Museum in Danville, where a miniature community held stories of history and fantasy in one fascinating room. We then traveled to New Haven to the Kentucky Railway Museum, where the history of trains came to life on the rails, with a mock train robbery and in miniature with a master train builder showing the way. Well, our journeys have taken us to some fascinating places, and we hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have. You know, our producers are always looking for story ideas, so if you've got one, let us hear from you. You can contact us at the address on your screen. Here you can find archived editions of Main Street as well. Until next time, from South Union, Kentucky and Logan County, I'm Barbara Deeb. And remember, we're just around the corner on Main Street.